If the Strait of Hormuz goes dark, the world doesn't slow down. It scrambles. Right now, that scramble is already happening.
Strait of Hormuz.
It's one of the many countries hoping the U.S. can reopen the nearby Strait of Hormuz.
President Trump asked the chairman of the Joint Chiefs why they can't just immediately reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
Since fighting between the United States, Israel, and Iran reignited in 2026, the Strait of Hormuz hasn't been officially closed, but it hasn't been open either.
Pretty soon I'll be declaring the Hormuz Strait a territory of the United States.
Commercial ship transits have collapsed by more than 90%. The International Energy Agency estimates the region has already lost over 1 billion barrels of oil that never made it to market. War risk insurance on tankers has spiked as high as 10% of a ship's entire hull value just to sail through. And Iran's own navy has announced more than once that the strait is closed until further notice.
Saying that Iran's central military headquarters have decided that from this hour the Strait of Hormuz is completely closed and any ship that tries to pass through it will be targeted. So that's the latest development from the Iranian side.
For a waterway that normally carries 1/5 of the world's oil and 1/5 of its liquefied natural gas, that's not a regional problem. That's a global one. So now the question every oil-producing government in the Gulf is asking is the same one engineers have quietly asked for decades. What if you didn't need the strait at all? This time the answer isn't a mountain-cutting canal or a 100-year-old railway revival. It's pipelines, ports, and overland corridors, funded by a coalition of Gulf states courted by Washington and racing to reroute 1/5 of the planet's energy supply before the next attack happens. Call it the $100 billion plan to make the Strait of Hormuz optional. The problem is, the math doesn't quite add up yet, and neither does the geography. Start with the pipeline that already exists and already matters more than any other. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline, known as Petroline, runs nearly 750 miles from the Abqaiq processing complex to the Red Sea port of Yanbu. It took wartime damage in recent months. Saudi Arabia says it's since been repaired and pushed back up towards 7 million barrels a day. Independent trackers tell a slightly more cautious story. The pipeline's original design capacity sits closer to 5 million barrels a day, and as of early this year, actual sustained throughput was closer to 2 million, leaving somewhere between 3 and 5 million barrels of theoretical spare room that's never actually been tested at full load. Saudi Arabia isn't waiting to find out. The kingdom is now weighing an expansion that would add up to 2 million more barrels a day of capacity on top of whatever the real number turns out to be. Petroline isn't a backup anymore. It's becoming a second main artery, on paper faster than anyone can confirm it in practice. Now the UAE. The Emirates already run a pipeline from their Habshan field straight to the port of Fujairah, on the Gulf of Oman's side of the peninsula, capable of moving close to 1.8 million barrels a day without ever touching the strait. But that pipeline was built for a different era, so the UAE is fast-tracking a second one, designed to roughly double that export capacity with a target of coming online as soon as 2027. Then there's Iraq, and Iraq's situation is different from either of them. Iraq has almost no coastline of its own on the open ocean. Its only real overland option is the 600-mile pipeline running north through Kirkuk to the Turkish port of Ceyhan on the Mediterranean. That line has spent years offline amid disputes between Baghdad and the Kurdish region. Now it's being renegotiated. At the same moment, Iraq's government is signing on the order of $60 billion in new deals with American companies across energy and infrastructure. Baghdad isn't stopping at Ceyhan either. It's reviving talks on the long-dormant Kirkuk to Banias line through Syria and separately fast-tracking a route to the Jordanian port of Aqaba. 3 different pipelines, 3 different neighbors, one goal: give Iraqi crude a way out that doesn't run past Iran's coastline. Here's the part almost nobody expects. Iran built one of these bypass pipelines too. Back in 2021, Tehran opened the Gora-Jask pipeline, a 1,000-kilometer line running from the Persian Gulf coast to a brand new terminal at Jask, on the open waters of the Gulf of Oman, at a cost of roughly $2 billion. The president at the time called it a historic day, and the ambition was 1 million barrels a day flowing outside the strait. Iran itself keeps threatening to close. Reality has landed far short of that promise. Years later, sustained throughput has never gotten close to design capacity, held back by sanctions and unfinished infrastructure. And according to shipping trackers during the current conflict, only a single tanker has loaded crude at Jask. The country holding the most leverage over the Strait of Hormuz apparently can't fully use its own escape route either. Around all of that, smaller pieces are falling into place. The UAE and Oman launched a new trade corridor linking Sharjah's ports with Omani ports outside the strait entirely. Egypt and Saudi Arabia are building out their own logistics link between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. And in Washington, the State Department has been explicit about the goal. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has described the ambition in stark terms. A permanent shift of global energy flows away from dependence on the strait altogether. American diplomats are reportedly working the same problem from the Levant side, coordinating potential routes through Syria, Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon. Add it up, and you're looking at well over $100 billion in pipelines, ports, corridors, and contracts, either underway or newly accelerated, all pointed at the same target. Which sounds on paper like the Straits days as an unavoidable choke point might be numbered. Here's the problem. Even with every one of these projects finished, the math still doesn't close. Saudi Arabia and the UAE combined top out at around 9 million barrels a day of alternative pipeline capacity even after expansion. The strait normally carries 20 million. That's a shortfall of more than 11 million barrels a day that simply has nowhere else to go. And during an actual disruption, independent estimates suggest the real spare capacity sitting unused in these pipelines, ready to absorb a shock, is closer to 2.5 million barrels. Not 11 million, 2.5. Kuwait has no pipeline alternative of its own at all, though it's now in talks to buy access to Saudi and Emirati networks, and that still leaves the single biggest hole in the entire plan sitting untouched. Every pipeline described so far moves crude oil. Not one of them moves natural gas. Qatar is the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas, and liquefied natural gas doesn't travel like oil. It has to be chilled down to a liquid at a coastal plant, loaded onto specialized tankers built for exactly that cargo, and unloaded at receiving terminals built to handle it on the other end. You can't run gas through an oil pipeline any more than you can pump water through a fiber optic cable. Qatar has no equivalent of Petroline. It never built one, because until this year nobody seriously planned for the Gulf's LNG shipping lane to become the vulnerable one. Now, with the strait under sustained pressure, Qatar is reportedly exploring whether it could route some of its gas overland through Saudi Arabia's existing network instead, a workaround that didn't exist as a serious conversation a year ago. But that's a proposal, not an alternative currently moving a single cubic meter of gas. For now, every ship carrying Qatari LNG still has to make the same transit through the same narrow lanes as everything else. So is this actually a plan to bypass the Strait of Hormuz? Or is it a plan to make the region slightly more resilient the next time the strait gets disrupted? Because those are two very different things. Analysts tracking the build-out describe it less as an escape route and more as a long-term strategic hedge, one that will take years and hundreds of billions more before it changes the fundamental picture. It won't replace the strait. It can't. Not with LNG still stranded, not with the volumes involved. What it can do is buy Gulf producers a few extra weeks of breathing room the next time tensions spike and shift some of the leverage that Iran currently holds over the entire global economy back into other hands. That's not nothing. A fifth of the world's oil having even a partial escape hatch changes how the next crisis plays out, but it's worth being honest about what's actually being built here, because the headline number obscures the real story underneath it. The Strait of Hormuz isn't being replaced, it's being hedged against. Every pipeline, every corridor, every rerouted tanker is a bet that when the next disruption comes, the world won't be caught with zero alternatives, only inadequate ones. Choke points, it turns out, don't get eliminated. They just get argued with, one pipeline at a time. And until someone solves the problem no pipeline can touch, moving liquefied natural gas without a ship, the Strait of Hormuz will keep holding a card no amount of billions can fully take away from it.